welcome
Hi.
to today's conversation. Thank you all for joining. As you know, we're going to do a conversation about some topic that's very current, and we're going to use the EPIC system, which is a system I've developed for the past 2.5, 3 years, and we'll go through all of that. The rules, very important. 4 rules that I need you all to verbally agree to. You have to be 100% honest. If you're thinking something and you don't say it, we don't get anywhere. So 100% honest. Listen, do not just wait to speak, listen. Please commit to the conversation, even if it gets uncomfortable. And then the last one is I want you to shift chairs. And what that means is that when someone else is talking, like William, it'll be, what is it like to think like William? What is it like to experience life like Michael? What is it like to experience life like Beth? I want you to shift chairs. And I'm going to ask you at the end where you shifted chairs, where you heard something that made you shift perspective in a way you hadn't before. So just know I'm going to ask you. Because the whole point is we know how you feel. We know how you think. The key of this is to see how someone else thinks and feels. That's why we do this. So, EPIC, we will begin with the first, which is equalization. And as I always say, if you want to have conversations of vulnerability, the worst way to start is discuss the thing you have the least in common. So I'm going to start with a very innocuous topic to get to know each other, and that is birth order. I want to know where you are in the birth order with your siblings. If you're an only child, that's fine. And then I want to know how much you are like that. Like if you are a youngest child, how much you are actually the stereotypical youngest child. If you are an oldest, how much are you stereotypically the oldest child? I am the youngest of 3. I am the cliche in that I probably had the most lenience because I was the youngest and my parents were more scared with my sisters, but I actually ended up becoming the oldest child. I would get up, wake everyone up. I would help them with their homework. I would pack their lunches. I would pack them off to college. So not a cliche youngest child because I was the one running the show. William.
Well, as you know, with me, nothing's that simple, right? So my parents got divorced when I was a baby. So I was an only child at my mother's house. I was the youngest child at my dad's house at the time. And then I became a middle child for a little bit. And then I became the oldest for probably most of that time.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
So all of the above?
All of the above.
Which one do you like the best? Which one did you, since you got to experience them all, which one did you like the best?
I think I associate the negative with all of them. As the youngest, I definitely got picked on a lot. At the oldest, which I have a lot of responsibility. And as a middle child, you just kind of get lost. And that was during my teenage years when you felt like you were lost no matter what anyway. So I guess
you're the first person I've asked that said all of the above.
Yeah, I wouldn't wish it on anybody. So that's
Beth, where are you?
I'm the oldest,
Okay.
and yeah, I fit the cliche. I
Mhm.
do. The good student, the overachiever, the hyper responsible one, the mother to my sister and all my younger cousins, and yeah, I fit.
You fit.
Yeah.
My husband is an oldest child, and he sort of like decides what happens, and then he realizes there are other people. And I'm like, you're such an oldest child. Like, you're like, we'll go to dinner. And I'm like, no, if you're youngest child, you never say, this is what we're going to do. And he's just like, we're going to go. I'm like, you're such a typical oldest child. Just sort of like, I'm going to do what I want. He also does it with a British accent, which doubles the conversation. Mike.
Yes.
And where do you fall in?
I was the youngest, and then I was the second to the youngest.
Okay.
So I was mothered to death by my sister. And then once the other ones came around, they kind of went off on their own because she had sisters now that she could play with. And then it was just me and my little sister. But it was, yeah, pretty stereotypical divorce, remarried.
Mm. And did you get away with more? Did you get away with more as the younger?
I got away with everything and anything I wanted to get away with, I think. She made me sugar sandwiches for lunch for school because that's what I liked. Just anything I wanted, I got it.
What's in a sugar sandwich?
Sugar.
Butter and sugar.
Yeah.
I've never heard of. Has anyone else heard of this?
No.
I've had butter and sugar on toast.
There you go. That's what I like, so that's what I got.
Well, if you have cinnamon, you have cinnamon toast. That I've had, but not just butter and sugar.
Not sugar toast. That's so weird.
Wow.
All right. Well,
Yeah,
I was
forgot about that. I might have to make some.
We literally,
Awesome.
we got one can of Coke a week that my sisters and I had to split the one can. So we would take 3 glasses and line them up in the counter and pour. And I remember sitting there watching it level, and that was all the soda we got for a week.
Wow.
No sugar sandwiches in my house, Mike. Jeez.
That's funny.
So let's pivot. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world right now. And the whole point of this is to have 4 individuals just talk about it. You are not representative of anyone other than yourselves and your life experiences. So what I want to do quickly is get a sense of what you're sort of looking to gain from this. We'll do it quickly, and then we'll launch into the topic. So Beth, what made you want to be a part of this?
I feel like I feel misunderstood a lot of the time. I don't fit in on either side in this world of kind of duality and, bipolar and, polarities. I'm kind of in the middle on some things. Obviously on moral issues such as what we're talking about, I am not, but I use a lot of empathy to try and understand where other people are coming from, because it confuses me when somebody doesn't think like I do. Rather than judge them, it confuses me, and I want to learn what's happening. Mm-hmm. And I get a lot of crap for it. I get a lot of crap because I don't think one way and I don't think another. And
what kind of crap? Just what does that mean? People calling you out, yelling at you online, comments. What does the crap mean?
Yes, even within my own family, I have a family member who lately has been quite vocal and calling me out on things because I question some things, or I ask some things, or I don't just, I'm not one to just swallow all the Kool-Aid. I'm just not going to do that. I don't know why. I just tend to want to try and figure out where we can come together more than anything. So when I saw your work, Riaz, and before this 4-chair conversation, and then when I immediately knew that I was interested in what you were doing, and I started watching them. And then as soon as you asked for volunteers, I was like, oh my gosh, this is right up my alley. This is it's a hard place to be. Mm-hmm. In the middle.
Most people, I would say, who I've talked to have said the ends are really loud, really judgy, and really aggressive, and I'm somewhere in the middle. So you're very much in good company there.
Okay, good.
Mike, what is it you're sort of looking to gain from here? The back, I know Mike. Mike and I have spoken and talked for 2 years. We've never met, but he reached out to me after a show I did with Glenn, and we've had some really good conversations. We talked on the phone for a long time, a while ago. So I know Mike. But Mike, what is it you're looking to sort of gain from this?
I think everybody's looking to understand everybody else. And what I kind of figured out that it's a lot of geographics involved in this. Sure. Because I don't see a lot of things that everybody else sees. And I know it's got to be the other way around. So sure. I'm trying desperately to understand where they're coming from. What is it legitimate? What is going on? Because the stories, sometimes we get the same stories up here, but when we break it down into a long conversation, it's like nobody gets where you're coming from, dude, because you came from the same place I did, and I don't understand. But it's got to be real. It's real to them in their head. They see it, they felt it, but nobody else around them that grew up with them gets that.
Mhm.
They didn't see it. So that's what we're trying to understand, what's going on in their head or that we don't see.
Sure. Geography is huge. I keep having to remind my friends who live overseas. They're like, New Zealand passed this law and Sweden passed this law and they could do it quickly. And I'm like, remember our size. Remember our population. You know, the only countries that are close to us are China, Brazil, and India. And those are not really democratic countries because you can't run a country that big without authoritarian influence. Like you just have to. So it's a tricky thing. But the experience I've had having traveled, and again, you going to tiny towns in Alaska, having conversations, and they're saying the same thing that I'm having a conversation with someone in Baltimore, DC, and I'm like, they would never cross paths, but they want the same thing, but they would never realize it because of the spin. Geography is huge. Geography is huge. And so where are you coming from, Beth? Where are you right now?
I am in Spring, Texas, which is a suburb of Houston.
Okay. And Mike, you are from where?
Pemberville, which is south of Toledo, Ohio.
Okay. And then we will get to Will, who I know very well. We went to high school together. We're very good friends. So I always feel like, hey, Will, why are you here? And part of it is I dragged him. But tell me, what is it you've done?
I tagged along. You didn't drag me. That's
You've done a bunch of my conversations. You've done the one about guns, the podcast about guns, the one I did with Glenn Beck. What is it that when you do these, what is it you're looking to get out of them?
I really echo everybody else. I know that there's so many different perspectives and coming from so many different places, and you really can't get the full picture unless you talk to different people that have different backgrounds and different views. And at the end of the day, after every conversation, even though you may not end with everybody agreeing, you usually realize that you're a lot closer than you thought. Like we're all somewhere in the middle, and you leave with something to think about. And so for you guys, I'm currently in Southern California, but I just moved out here a couple of months ago. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, and I worked in Northern Virginia near DC, so I spent a lot of time in that area.
I don't think of you as California yet.
Will never think of me as California.
You will. You'll become one of us. Trust me, it happens. You fight it for a while, and then you realize the weather's just too good, and then you become soft. That's what happens. It's totally true. I was so like, I'm East Coast, and now after a few years, I'm like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. Why is everyone so angry there? So let's talk about race, but the topic I want to sort of open up with, very current, is these statues and monuments coming down. And I just want to get a sense, again, there are no rights or wrongs here, what people's opinions are on that. And I'm going to start with William. In terms of these monuments, just sort of talk us through what your thought process is when you're seeing it. What are you seeing? What are you agreeing with? What are you not agreeing with it? And again, it's the beginning of a conversation.
Right. So I'll go through different periods of my life. I would say for the most part, up maybe through college, I ignored most statues. That's why it's funny to me when a lot of people talk about them as being history. I think for us, it made more sense to not even pay attention to what they were because a lot of them don't really represent history for us.
And by us, you're saying as a Black individual.
Yes, sorry. But yeah, after researching a lot more of this, especially I guess it was 2015 with the debates around the Confederate flag, and also traveling, and when you're in a new place, you want to look at the statue and read about it so you learn more, paying more attention to it. I mixed feelings. For the most part, every statue that has been discussed to this point, I agree with them being moved. I don't necessarily agree with them being demolished or destroyed. I can kind of understand why some of that's happening, but I agree with them being moved to a more appropriate place, like maybe a museum or even a graveyard that memorializes, the people that fought on the Confederate side in the war, or different things like that. But I know that there's an issue where people say, well, where do you stop? And I do have a stopping point. And I think that's what people need to understand is it's not a free for all. I think everybody has a line, and I think there needs to be a discussion maybe around each individual one, if not groups of them. And, you find out where the line is. Like, just to throw one out there, people were like, well, what about Mount Rushmore? George Washington had slaves, Thomas Jefferson had slaves. Those were presidents of the United States. I don't want to get too deep in this. I know you want to get into it. But I feel like there is a line of where we shouldn't touch history. And I don't think that applies to most of the Confederate statues in question.
I want to ask you about what you said earlier, that growing up you didn't pay attention. Because I think there's something very interesting that as you were looking around at monuments and statues, that are you saying you knew that those things, those statues, that history was not yours or part of your history? And so, what happened there? Did everyone go away?
Still have you. Well, I still have you.
Oh, I don't know. My whole screen just shifted. When you weren't paying attention because it wasn't your history, talk a bit about that you knew that these things were there, but they weren't representative of your history, your experience. Can you talk a bit about that? Because I never thought about that you're looking at them your whole life and you're like, not representing me, not representing my life.
Right. I mean, and it's reflective. Obviously, when I wasn't paying attention, I wasn't thinking about why I wasn't paying attention. But, statues, memorials, like statues, have purpose. So the memorial that went up for Martin Luther King in Washington, D.C., that had a lot of meaning. And, it makes you want to go see that. It's inspiring, et cetera. Even some of the ones for the president that are up, they had this, they have meaning for a lot of people, but without knowing even the details of Civil War with the Confederate statues and everything, there's no reason for a parent or a teacher or anyone else that may know more about a specific statue to encourage me or anyone else, in my neighborhood to learn more about the person being represented. So they were just kind of there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, Mike, let's just shift to you. What are your thoughts about what's happening here specifically with the statues coming down?
Well, have you ever noticed how the meanings of everything changes throughout time? The word girl has not always meant the word girl. It used to mean children of either sex. So some of the things that I've noticed are the meanings of some of these statues to the people. How these people grew up, how it was completely different. I don't think we can understand their morals, their culture, of the past. We don't understand that. We would be completely offended by some of the things coming out of their mouths 100 years ago. Well, to them, that was a good thing. That was a hero. That was a good thing that happened or whatever. And we completely demolish all that. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Sometimes we find out things later on. Riaz, you might be the devil 100 years from now to a group of people. But for right now, you're a great guy. So I don't know. I don't have a problem with taking them down. I love William's idea about putting them in a museum. That's fine because we don't normally see them. We might know that if we do go to a museum, we might learn about them more than just seeing it and a plaque that we can hardly read. I don't have a problem with it, but like you said too, there's a limit to it. I mean, do we just take a jackhammer to Mount Rushmore? I never had a problem with it. It's offensive to want to get rid of history. Some of the history that people still hang on to is that was a great thing. There are a ton of people that believe that the Confederate flag meant something completely different than racism. That doesn't even enter their mind. And I mean, I'm talking Black people in the South that honor that flag. It's means something completely different to them.
Like what?
it was a way of life to them. It was there was more than just slavery to it. There was a political thing to it. And I'm not saying that their minds weren't thinking of the detriment of where they were at in their life. They were thinking, this is my way of life and don't change it. It's a completely different culture. You were changing their culture. And like I said, even today, there are people in the South, Black people, that don't think like Black people in the North. It's still that way.
William?
And it's 2020.
William, your thoughts on that? Because William, you're actually from a dividing state. You're from Maryland, so you're literally
Yeah, just like everything else.
Yeah. You can't choose what kind of child you want to be. You can't choose what side you want to be.
Right.
When Mike says that there's a difference of perspective, specifically on the Confederate flag between Blacks in the North and Blacks in the South, is that something you were aware of? Is that something that you know? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I've done a lot of research on it, especially like I said around when the Confederate flag was being removed a few years ago, and I've read up more recently. And I mean, in general, yeah, obviously, without even that, there are definitely Blacks in the South that find the flag offensive at all. But that's, I would actually argue that that's more reason to remove the flag and the statues. Basically, what happened, I mean, to the point of what Mike's saying, it represents a Southern way of life. You know, the Southern gentleman, the dame, the beautiful ladies, just very nice people. You know, it's supposed to represent you having that mentality, that strength, etc., which is not negative at all. You know, it's a good thing for people to aspire to be. However, that mindset was built out of, I think it's called the Lost Cause. And it was something that was written right after the Civil War. And it was kind of meant to be a way for the Confederates, well, the survivors and the people of the South to have an easy transition after the war. So they did honor the people that fought in the war. They fought very courageously. But if you read the writing, you'll see that they tried to paint it as the war was a war of Northern aggression on Southern states that were just fighting for their way of life. The entire war was only about states' rights. And it even goes as far as saying that slaves were immigrants or indentured servants, and they were treated very well. I think at one point it even said that they were treated more mildly than anywhere else in the world. So that's the beginning of the idea of all of these statues about these Confederate war heroes and the Confederate flag, which, by the way, the Confederate flag is one of many flags that the Confederates used in the Civil War. The Confederate flag began to become more popular really when the KKK adopted it as one of our first police forces. The KKK made it popular. And this goes to what Mike was saying. At that time, the KKK weren't, you know, they weren't looked at as the devil. You know, they were looked at as the protectors. And over time, that flag just got more symbolism. And to a lot of people, as generations go by, it definitely lost that edge. Like, it's definitely not true that sports a Confederate flag or wants to hang a Confederate flag or attaching themselves to the KKK or even the Civil War, even if they don't believe it had anything to do with slavery. They're attaching it to these Southern values that were written out for them to help them progress for the war. But that's for all of the white people. For all of the Black people, the descendants of the slaves that are down there, or even today, like if I went to visit, it means something completely different. And I want to talk about like when the actual statues and everything went up. But I don't want to get on too much of a tangent right now, but it's all related to that. So as a Black person, to see, for example, a Confederate flag hanging in front of a state building, that's an indication to me that in some way I'm not welcome in that state. So that's my issue with the flag. Even if they have found a way to make it seem okay, if you want to wear it on your T-shirt, if you want to put it on your truck, that's your right. You can do whatever you want. I might judge you. You shouldn't care if I judge you. You don't know me. I should get to know you before I judge you anyway. That's fine. But when you put it in front of a state building, when you put it in public property, that's representing your city and your state. And I think that sends a different message.
Well, see, and that's where, like you said, you have to get to know someone, because you don't know what that means to them. Just like the girl means a boy and girl child. That's what I'm talking about right there. It used to mean this, and now it means this. So if we keep changing everything that words mean, how can I blame an 80-year-old guy that goes, no, that's not what that means? Again, I can't see geographically what your life is like. I don't know what this guy's life is like, what his past is, what that meant to him. How could it be offensive to him if he grew up knowing that that's a good thing? Egregious used to mean good, not bad. So I can understand that, and it's frustrating because it seems like the world is changing. There's a guy at Lowe's, he said, I've lived too long. And I laughed, and he said, no, it's not funny. He said, I have lived too long. Everything is upside down. Nothing means what it used to. So, yeah, it's a tough call. What do you do? Just like Oprah said. And it was really offensive to a lot of people, but I got it. She said, old white people are going to have to die before racism is gone. And that was, people were like, are you kidding me? What are you telling them? You want to kill white people? What's going on? No. And it was true, because people, it's ingrained in their minds. This is good. And it's not, in my head, I'm not thinking horrible, offensive things when I say this, but it's good to me. And to someone else, they're like, whoa, dude, what are you doing? So yeah, it's gonna have to be a cultural change. And for that to happen, those ideas have to die. That's all there is to it.
Beth, thank you for your patience for that. Beth, what are your thoughts on this? And what are your thoughts on this?
So, I'm honoring what you said, Riaz, is that you want this to be really honest. And this is one of the topics that I struggle with the most. I'm not originally from the South. I'm not originally from Texas. I grew up in Ontario, Canada, and I moved when I was a teenager. And so I've been in the South for a long time, and Texas is kind of different from the deep South. We just now are getting sweet tea. You know, it used to be, I mean, we've always, it used to be if you ordered iced tea here in Texas, it was just without, and now you have to say with or without sugar. Yeah. So, I mean, it's, you know, it's a little different. Texas is not the deep South. I've never really understood the Confederacy, and when everything started coming up, you know, years ago in South Carolina, I tried to look into what does that really mean? What's so important? And there really is, like Mike was saying, there's something more to being a Southerner than just I'm hanging on to slavery until the bitter end. It's more about a culture and a way of being that unfortunately also includes slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as statues go, like William was saying, I don't really have a statue. There's nothing that I have ever walked past or thought like I have to go visit this statue over and over again. There's nothing really that special to me. My issue is, where do you stop?
Mm-hmm.
And this is what gets me in trouble with my friends who are more liberal than me. Where do you stop? You tear down this thing, you tear down another thing. You know, I live in a suburb of Houston. We're named after General Sam Houston. Are we going to change the name of the city of Houston now? Are we going to change, there's a huge statue of Sam Houston. It's gigantic. It's 100 feet, I don't know, I think it's about 100 feet tall. Just north of here, are people going to go and pull that down? You know, at what point do you stop? And what was really interesting is just today, I saw online that a statue of, I'm looking at it right now because I took a picture of it, I thought it was really interesting, a statue of Matthias Baldwin, an early abolitionist who fought against slavery 30 years before it ended. He was, the way the reporter described it, he was for Black Lives Matter before, you know, back in the 1800s. Rioters defaced his statue. And somebody's at the door, but oh well. And
it's
so,
thought police.
Pardon?
The thought police.
Yes. Oh, I told you it's hard. Anyways, I thought that it was really interesting. You know, it's one of those things that if you just keep tearing and tearing and tearing, you know. So I just got my master's recently to become a therapist. I was a teacher for many years. And so I've learned a lot about psychology. And one of the things that you learn when doing therapy with clients is having people release their anger, like they used to back in the 80s and the 90s and whatever, with a bataka or a baton or a bat or something, is not cathartic. It actually does not. It's proven that it does not release anything. It does not release anything. And it does not lessen your anger, okay? So the tearing things down, the constantly pulling things down and removing things from history, I'm like, okay, but okay, go ahead and tear down that statue. I don't have any strong hold on it. I don't have, I don't have any, you know, strong affiliation with something, but where are you going to draw the line?
And I think William mentioned that, because I think
Yes.
there's a lot of times the whataboutism, if we address the problem this much, where does it stop? And what we see is the scariest conclusion way down the road, and that's what's terrifying us. You know, I think when William made the distinction between, if a guy wants to have it on his truck or car or his shirt as a private citizen, because it means something different to him, Mike, is something that is different, that makes sense. Now, William may judge him or he may have the conversation with him, but that's a private choice. That makes perfect sense.
Right.
But as a marker to a public building, does that feel as appropriate? Does that feel like that makes sense when you're saying, as a government building, we are here in 2020 as an entranceway to this government building? Is that reminder, is that statue necessary? That becomes a question, because I do think there's a difference between private usage and public usage. William, the whataboutism, how for you, because you are the minority, because you are Black, because you are not in the majority, you spend a lot more time, like I do, trying to convince the majority about things. And there's just more of them. And so you find you talk a lot more, you share a lot of conversations, you repeat yourself, you hear a lot of things. The whataboutism, how often does that come up with you when you're discussing these issues? But if you do this, then where's the end? How often does that come up in conversations that you have?
How often? I won't say every time, but that is usually the opposite argument to anything that we're discussing.
Mm-hmm.
It's very rare that I talk to someone that completely disagrees with whatever the issue is. It's usually, I understand that, but if we do this, then where does it stop? And it's funny to me because, well, and this may have happened too, when seatbelts became mandatory. Like maybe there was a conversation there. But there was a time in our lifetime when we didn't have to wear seatbelts. And because, people were dying, seatbelts became mandatory. I doubt there was an argument that if we make seatbelts mandatory now, we're just gonna get rid of cars at some point. It's a silly comparison, but in a way it's very similar. Like there is a point for everybody when it's too much. There's some point somewhere. And that's why I said, if it needs to happen is we have a conversation about every single statue and every single monument and come to a consensus for that one, then we know when we reach the point for the majority, then let's do that. But to just throw out a hypothetical, that seems dismissive to the issue at hand to me.
I do think it ends up making, it makes conversations very hard to be productive. For example, in the gay rights thing, I would say years ago, and again, everyone's at a different place. So people do change. The comments I would hear, the reactions I would hear, the looks I would get from people when I was walking with someone is very different now than it was 10, 20 years ago. And the argument was always like, well, if you're going to marry two men, what's to stop you from a man marrying a goat? What's to stop you from a man marrying a salamander? Because if marriage is, if you're just that, Mike, the amount of times that I would sit there and I'm like, I don't even know where to start that conversation. And it's sort of the idea argumentatively that we've done this, that we're like, I don't know where on the bridge we're going to meet, so we're just going to blow up the bridge. It's constantly like, your view is way over there and mine's way over here and we're never going to get on the same page. I don't know a lot of rational people, and I guess rational is an important part of the equation. I don't know how many people who are defacing and tearing down statues and graffitiing are there to be cathartic or productive. I think that there is rage there, and I don't think it's necessarily designed to be productive. And the rage and the rioting are useful, because if this was an organized, peaceful protest on one day, June 10th, we would all watch it, and then we would move on, and it would be a part of the news, and we'd move on. This makes it in our faces, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But the whataboutism does, I hear it in many conversations, makes us jump to scenarios that are so far ahead. Will we get there? Possibly. Is Gone with the Wind, does that deserve to be? I don't think so. I don't think.
I had to have personal thoughts about that too, because that's
Tell me.
Art.
That's what?
That's art.
Yeah.
Monuments and statues they're not art. And if they are, put them in a museum. But Gone with the Wind is art. It's somebody's representation of that time period. And if you want to present it with conversations about that time period, I agree with that. But I'm personally, right now, I'm not behind the decision to remove it. The last thing I heard was they're going to remove it until they can put it back up with more information about the time. So there's sort of a compromise there. But the same thing with getting rid of Huckleberry Finn, when they started removing Huckleberry Finn from the schools. I feel like that's an overreach. But that's my personal opinion, and I can understand others having, fallen somewhere else on the spectrum in terms of that. But again, that's my line. Somebody has a line at a different place, and we should all discuss where the line is. I don't think everybody should be able to just go and tear down statues and, oh yeah, that one, we're at that time where we're tearing them down, so it's okay to tear them all down. That doesn't make sense.
And
that gives people that gives people the Huckleberry Finn. You have to explain it to kids, but for an adult, you would think that they'd understand that, hey, that's representative of that time. That is how it was like. That gives you an idea. That helps people understand what was going on and the difference, how far we've come. I don't care about the flag, the Confederate flag. It means nothing to me. However, if I post something online asking a question, holy cow. And that's all I'm doing is trying to get both sides of an equation. My family has gone, dude, what are you doing? And if you look at my post, I'm asking questions. Please talk to me. I want to have a productive conversation. And that's all I'm doing. I'm not defending any of this. I'm just saying I hear things on both sides and I want to understand. So I ask a lot of questions. And if history can be, if a book can answer those questions, or if a movie can answer those questions, how people thought back then, that's great.
I mean, we're very
difficult online. I just wanted to respond real quick because you're right about Huckleberry Finn. Like I said, I agree. I don't think it should be taken out. And that's similar to what you were saying before about the flag. But I think the reason why there's such an uproar now, I think the reason why the people that are ripping these down is because we aren't at a place now where we can feel comfortable of other people looking at how things were back then and seeing it as a back then thing. There's still people today, especially in the South, that are learning not just history, but this is the way life is. This is the way life should be to this day. And they might read Huckleberry Finn and think that's the way things are and should be. I don't think that means they should take it out of schools. I think that means that we need to do a better job of teaching what it means. I think that's the reaction to that. Same thing with Gone with the Wind. The reaction to what's happening right now that people don't understand is going on in the world is to get rid of all representation of it being different than what it really was. I don't agree that that's correct, but I understand their thought process. I think it's the overreach that you all are talking about when you say where it is.
And it's not a uniquely American problem. My parents were born in Bombay. It doesn't exist anymore. It's not called Bombay, it's called Mumbai. And there was a decade where we would sit there and I would say, how is so-and-so in Bombay? And they'd say Mumbai. And I'm like, oh God, like it just took us a while. Rhodesia was renamed to Zimbabwe. We're not the only nation that's struggling with a history that has some skeletons in it. I think there is, because the voice, and again, we're talking about numbers, the voice of a minority it's very hard to get the majority to listen, to pay attention, and to only hear the productive parts of your conversation. Because for the opposing side, what gets over to them is the worst factors of our arguments, the worst parts, the worst footage, the worst tweets. That's what makes its way over, because that will click and be shared much more than it normally will. So, here we are, we're four people. Let me ask, do any of us think that Gone with the Wind should be taken away? Raise your hand if you think Gone with the Wind should be taken away. No. And we're all completely different backgrounds. So that seems like a place that we can all agree. The statues, I have to say I agree with William in terms of private versus public. In terms of Houston, I don't know what's going to happen to Houston because Bombay switched to Mumbai. And that may be something that happens. But, words do change, acceptance changes. And having lived my life, my biggest fear growing up was people finding out I was gay. I remember driving to high school, William, and being alone in the car and saying to myself at 17 years old, just say it out loud. Just say I am gay out loud in a car at 55 miles an hour by myself. Couldn't do it. I was afraid there was a tape recorder somewhere someone would find out. Now I'm sitting here and I'm like, I cannot believe that not only is gay, accepted, but you get cruised by all these straight parents on the playground and like, oh, a gay family. And you're like, wait, we've become like the flavor of the day. And I can see people tracking us and being like, oh, it'd be nice to have gay friends. It's bizarre to see that change, but it is possible. I think when it comes to race, it has always been tricky because there is a side on the majority white side that really does not want it to change. I had someone bring up in a not a conversation for chairs, but in a conversation saying, really the problem started when the blacks were allowed to leave slavery. That's where it all started. That was an actual conversation said, and they said that's where the problem started because we weren't a nation that fought about rights when everyone knew their place. And this was not a crazy person. The problem is those people don't speak because who are they going to talk to? And they know they're going to get in trouble. And what William and I are constantly saying is, we know there are more of them out there than you might realize because they don't show their heads to you. They show their heads to us. And they happen a lot more than you might realize. And so a lot of these debates end up us engaging people far more extreme than you two might be, because that's who we're trying to get heard. Mike, you're smiling. What are you thinking?
Well, I don't think the problem started when slavery ended.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about, this isn't me, I'm guessing what was going on, because slavery was fought. Not everybody in the United States was, hey, slaves, great thing. There were a lot of people that didn't like that idea. There were a ton of them. That's why there was a war. So it's yeah.
A better way to say it though is when blacks became free in the United States. So you may not have been for slavery. You may not have owned slaves. Slavery was for the wealthy. So there are a lot of white Southerners that never owned slaves, but
they were actually against it. That's what I'm saying. There was a war before that.
They were definitely
there was
against
arguments about this before there was ever a war. So,
absolutely, they were definitely against slavery in and of itself. But what Riaz is saying, which I agree with, obviously, is that there was an order, there was a hierarchy. So, like, let's say if they could have ended slavery, so that you're not owning human beings, but blacks were still lower in the hierarchy and they were happy with that, then we would have maintained the order and everything would have been fine. That's the thought process.
But they keep
no, it wouldn't, because eventually they'd get educated and this would happen.
And that's the problem.
Yeah. And it really is. It feels like it comes up a lot, race. And if you don't have it in your immediate world, you're like, why does this keep coming up? But the incidence of it, who would have thought until the George Floyd video was released that there was a war being fought in Minneapolis between a police department and the really poor black community that had, harassment and all. And I keep telling people, my conservative friends love statistics, and they're like, but there are not that many statistical deaths and all. And I'm like, if the police officer had gotten off of George Floyd's neck a minute earlier, it wouldn't have been a statistic. There's a huge levels of harassment that happen until death that still take place and are nowhere documented. Mike, your smile.
That's where people are. I ask all the time, and it ends a conversation. What are you doing about it? Mm-hmm. If this is such an important thing, what have you done? What are you doing? What representatives have you talked to? What have you gotten with the police department and got a group together and talked to them and said, look, there's a problem. What has been done? Florida had a huge problem. They've cut their incidents in more than half.
Camden, New Jersey.
That's a start.
Camden, New Jersey.
So if you're not doing anything and yet you're still online inciting people to be violent, something's wrong. You're not doing your job. We all haven't been doing our job. This is the whole presidential thing has blown up because of online. Mm-hmm. Because we're too eager to do this instead of actually doing something. We fell down on a job. America fell down on a job. We let helicopter moms be a popular thing. We let everybody gets a trophy be a popular thing. There was a lot of people saying, time out, but it's not going to hurt anything. Okay, here we go.
My question, Mike, is who is you when you say, what are you doing?
To the people online, to the people that are just screaming a fit.
Right. Well,
I asked them, what can I do to help? Where can I stand next to you? How can I help you? I don't know what to do, but I'll do it. I've written my representatives. I've talked to people all over the place. My son's an officer. What do you do? He doesn't know what to do because nobody's talking to him on the other side.
I think the difference is that that a lot of people aren't able to have a reasonable conversation about it. So you know, coming in very bluntly saying like, you know, I want to help. I'm gonna ask, and Riaz knows, I tell people, ask me the question how you're thinking it. You know, if you try to filter it so much, then it's not, you probably won't get your answer. So I appreciate your approach, but not everybody does. And so you may be running into a bunch of roadblocks in that sense, but I can answer like, yes, people have talked to the local police departments. People have contacted the representative. People have been doing things forever to the point where they get out and protest, and then they get out and protest, and they're not.
I don't get an answer.
Well, I know. I'm just saying from your individual experience, that's unfortunate. But from a global, or I should say national perspective, the ones that are, and this isn't just from our experience, the ones that are most affected in any experience as a minority screaming to the majority are unheard by many and silenced by those that have some agenda in the game to make sure that they aren't heard. So all the attempts may not even reach down to a level where you will hear them, and it gets to the point where someone wants to make sure that you see them, so they make a scene on TV, or they block a highway, or they might loot a store. You know, it's a lot of stuff was built up before it got to the point where you're comfortable having, not you're comfortable, where you're able to have this conversation with somebody else. Like it's unfortunate it gets to that, but something big usually has to happen before the conversation happens. And the conversation often starts with somebody saying, why are these people doing this? You know, I remember having a conversation with a guy in a bar when there was a protest on 395 by Washington, D.C. And his question is, why can't they find another way to do this? It's, you know, it's right before Christmas. We can't go shopping. You know, why? I'm not the problem. You know, I'm not the one that they should be blocking, that they should be impeding the life of. Why are they doing this? And I looked at him and I said, so that you and I, who just met each other, will have this conversation. Because it just doesn't happen until it gets to that extreme point.
Yeah, please.
So I have some thoughts. I think one of the things that, you know, asking what I can do. I'm actually half Egyptian. My father was Egyptian, but he was very light-skinned, and nobody, you know, people just think I'm a regular white woman. But I never noticed my dad's accent. I knew he, you know, wore this hat to keep his kinky hair down at night. But I didn't know what it, you know, that was just what my dad did. That's just my family. And so, you know, I have an awareness of different cultures, and you know, the two sides of my family were very different. What I know I can do is, because I am not dichotomous, I can be in the middle and talk to both sides. And that's what I'm hoping to do. That's what I'm hoping to do with my friends, that have more conservative or, you know, racial undertones to their thought processes. It's not going to happen from somebody screaming at you on Facebook or Instagram. It's just not. Myself being, like I said, you know, kind of more in the middle, when somebody sends a post that says that I am, so there was something that I saw from a family member about, if you were shocked by what happened to George Floyd, you're a racist.
Mm-hmm.
William, what do you think about that before I continue?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's, I guess to be blunt, that's ridiculous.
Okay, well, that was my thought. But then I check myself and I'm like, oh my God, is that my white privilege? And I'm also, I don't want to pander. I don't want to pretend that I know what it's like to be Black. I don't want to pander. Nobody knows that I'm half Egyptian. Nobody has ever called me, you know, the words that my dad got called. Nobody knows. So I don't know what it's like, but I've been really immersing myself in the situation. It doesn't help to scream at me that because I cried when I watched the video of George Floyd, because I was outraged. I was more, sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
I was more outraged by the other police officers who didn't do anything, who sat back. When I watched it, I must have ranted and raved in our bedroom, walking back and forth. And every time I tried to crawl back into bed, I got back out and paced back and forth because I didn't understand how the other officers could allow him to do that to him for so long.
It's powerful. It's powerful because they were so confident in their protection. They were so confident in their choice.
Yep.
There was no doubt. And that to me speaks more volumes of not just what was happening, but we are fine. This will never, video it, this will never come back to us.
I tried to put myself, okay, I'm a police officer. I don't know what's going on. I tried to jump into the situation. Okay, what was he thinking? Okay, I'm sure he was having a huge, I'm talking about ex-officer Derek Chauvin. I'm sure he was having a huge rush of adrenaline, right? For whatever reason. But I was incensed with the other ones who didn't just go over and knock his block off, who didn't just, whisper, even if you want to save face, whisper in his ear, get the hell off his neck. Get off of him, man. He's unconscious. He's not moving, blah, 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 whatever. That's what I wanted to happen. But it's going to have to come. It's not going to come. Change is not going to come from people screaming at me because my skin is light and telling me to feel guilty because my skin is light. That's not where change is going to come, in my opinion. It's going to come from people like us who are willing to have tough conversations with both sides. For me to immerse myself, I really, in the last 2 weeks, have immersed myself in learning as much as I possibly can. Watching the documentary. Today I read all about Greenwood.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't grow up in this country. I mean, I did have to take American history, but it was a couple of classes over the course of high school and college. I never heard of Greenwood in my life. Never. And so then I sat down and I had a conversation with my husband about it and why it's a big deal.
The first Confederate statues. I mean, not the first. Like as soon as the Civil War ended, there were a couple of statues that were put up for to honor lost soldiers. But the first wave of us having a lot of Confederate statues actually happened about 40 or 50 years after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, and at the start of the Jim Crow laws. Like it was a very obvious intent to make sure that these now free Blacks know their place, and they were strategically put in areas for that, like the front of state buildings. When that died down for years, the next big wave of statues and monuments being put up was between 1950 and the end of the 60s, which again was the time during the Civil Rights Movement. So it's if you actually look at when these statues went up in 1955, 1968, 1970 something, it's hard to convince me that they were all of a sudden ready to honor these fallen soldiers from a side of the war that lost as an attempt to leave the United States of America. I mean, that's the other thing is they declared war on the United States and they lost. So even if at this point, we were talking about the flag before, not necessarily the statues, but the flag is similar too. Like Mississippi, they changed their flag sometime around 1965 or something to include the Confederate flag in their flag. These symbols meant something, and it meant that we still maintain the power here. Like you all may be getting more rights, but we still maintain the power here. That was the point of them going up. And I don't lose sight of what you said, Mike, about how things change, as time goes on, things mean different things. But in terms of this, that's actually a scary thought. Because the guy not the guy, when you were talking about Oprah, she said, we won't be able to get rid of this until a lot of old white people die. These statues, these monuments, and all these things were put up to make sure that this doesn't end when the older generations die off. They were meant to continue this. And the people in the South that there are plenty that have zero idea. They completely think that the war was about states' rights. It was the North's fault. And these people represent me because of my values and my way of life. But you put them across from a Black person in this country, and the conversation that they have is very hurtful. You could even say disrespectful, unintentionally by them, because they don't know anything else. That's all they know. So why should we keep these monuments up in these places? Why should we continue telling this whitewashed version of history to have this confusion continue going on even after the generations die off?
And I agree. And here's the point though. Vietnam, that was a pointless war. Mm-hmm. Pointless. Yet there were heroic people that died in that war fighting for the United States. If somebody had a statue of my brother and he died in Vietnam, that he saved however many people, that's great. You're going to take his statue down and throw it out because he didn't understand that it was a pointless war.
Is his statue in Vietnam?
No, it's fiction. It's fictitious. I
know, but I mean, your hypothetical example. The statue's in the United States, right? There is no Confederate States of America. That's what they were fighting for. They were fighting,
but they didn't understand. There's, like I said, there's a lot of those people that didn't understand that was a bad thing that they were fighting for. They thought it was a good thing.
And I think what William's saying is, but the fact the statues are still there represents a whitewashed version. For those people who thought that slavery wasn't the real issue, who thought this was Northern aggression, the statues remind them of that, but that's not actually the truth. So even if people have had this, what he's saying is the statues being there are saying to those people, yes, your version is right. It was noble. And what William is saying that's not actually the case. I think in Vietnam it's different because there's no gray area of treason in Vietnam. I agree with you, pointless war. But in terms of the insurrection of leaving the United States, and the United States won and said no, that is what the outcome of the war was. So to have statues that honor the treasonous people who were leaving. Now, again, battles and all are different. I think they should belong in a museum. I absolutely do. But having them in front of capitals and all, I want to actually hear what you thought about Williams when he said that those statues were purposeful when they were built. I would love to know what your thoughts on that, because I hadn't thought about that. I never thought about that they're like and I didn't know the time they were built, which are very, very interesting. Beth, you had thoughts.
Yes. William, thank you for that information because I did not know.
And
to me, it's about intent. It's the intent behind it. I had no idea that statues, like I said, I'm not from the South originally. I had no idea the intent of when they were putting them up. It's sort of like, you know how when you were in the back seat with your siblings or your cousins or whatever, and it was like the line down the back of the seat and your mom said, don't poke each other, don't touch each other. Mm-hmm. And somebody would put their finger right up to the line and go, I'm not touching you. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like that.
The intent.
The intent. It's like that little thing of, I'm going to get you. I'm going to get you. You know, you know, there are race riots, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, you know, they're starting to, now seems like a good time to put up a statue. I did not know that. That changes things. The intent, if it's to honor, and I like the idea actually of taking a statue and putting it in a Confederate burial site. I think that's a great idea, or a museum. But it's like that. It's like what's the intent? When Trump could have that rally on the 18th or the 20th, or he could have it in another town in Oklahoma, but to have it on Juneteenth in Tulsa I don't see how anybody could not say what the intent is.
And probably with Candace Owens there, who was the most vocal person to say that there is absolutely no problem whatsoever with race. It's all in their heads. I mean, again, intent. And again, I like Candace. I like her conservative viewpoints. I like a different point of view. But yes, when it comes to there being
I don't like Candace.
I know.
I love a different point of view.
I feel differently about her now. I'll be honest. I do. Because it was so... It set people's work back a lot. It really did. But anyway, regardless of that, I do think that the intention is there. Mike, your thoughts?
Well, that's what yes, the intent of it wasn't known to the people in the South. They didn't know what the intent was. So they just thought, okay, now we have a statue of this, or whatever. I don't know what was known and what wasn't, but yes, intent is everything. What is he going to explain as the intent? And is it going to be accepted if it is explained? Or are we just learning from this? Or like I said, I don't know yet. I'm way willing to let things go until we learn a little bit more about it. False flags is just killing us in everything. The women that come forward just to punish the men. If you do that, every woman should just jump on them if they know that it is a false flag. If it's discovered that that's an absolute false flag, boom, they should be nailed without thinking about it, by women, by Muslims, by Christians, by whoever does a false flag. That just kills everything. Jesse Smollett, what the heck?
Mike, you watched the 13th, right?
Yeah.
So they went through and pretty much explained how we went from slavery to Jim Crow, to privatized prison systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, down to today. I bring it up to basically say that once everyone becomes wise and makes a stink, they change it so that they can still continue doing the same thing they were doing before in a way that will be more accepted. So if I'm understanding you correctly, the false flags that you're talking about, they aren't always apparent to everyone. And then we go through this process of the ones that they are apparent to are usually in the minority, and they scream to the majority to pay attention. And I feel like that's what this is. It's another cycle of that. And I feel like we just keep having more and more and more cycles of that.
But yeah, we're screaming at the wrong false flag. We're doing it kind of backwards is what
I mean, I'm from a national perspective. When we're looking at everything that's going on in the country right now, that's driving people to rip down these statues, that's where the rage is coming from. Because there's still these symbols up that represent that period of time, and we're watching on video things that shouldn't be happening in 2020 anymore either. It's like we're not changing enough in this way, and it's extending to that.
Yeah.
Mike, when you were talking, I was thinking about the difference between objective generalizations and subjective things that are very personal. The closest thing that I can come to identifying with anything that William has experienced is with my children. So both my children have mental illness, severe mental illness. They're adults, and my daughter was diagnosed when she was 2.5. My son he was in elementary age. He was about 4 when we realized something was going on. And this has been decades in the making of dealing with all of this, okay? Nobody except another family with mental illness truly gets what I'm going through, what my husband and I have gone through, how my children suffer. And with mental illness, people look at their objective behavior. They look at my son acting this way. They look at the tattoos that he's put on himself. They look at this, they look at that. They look at my daughter, you know, when she has a breakdown. Or when my son, when he becomes paranoid. And they can say, oh, well, you know, Beth, it's just so easy to just write him off. It's just so easy. It's just this, it's just that. So something that's making me, that is reminding me of this conversation is about a month ago, my daughter was in her apartment and she was feeling suicidal. She called a helpline. She called a hospital helpline that we have taken her to before. This was 2 a.m. She calls me, I answer the phone. She says, Mama, I'm not doing well. We talk. She says, you're on the line with someone from the hospital. I said, okay. And the hospital said, we've dispatched the police, and they're going to do a welfare check, a mental health check on her. And the 4 of us, the hospital person, myself, the police, and our daughter, were going to make the decision of whether she should go to the hospital or not, whether she needed to be inpatient to save her life, okay? I was listening to her. She actually, in that moment, was very calm. And she was, and I said, okay, you know, make sure you get your toothbrush, make sure to pack your medication. She's like, I've got it, Mom, I've got it. And I was like, okay. I stayed on the phone until the police were ready to transfer her. She was calm. She was not crying. She was not screaming. That had happened before. That had happened in the weeks and the days and the hours before that one defining moment on that phone call. When we went to visit her in the hospital, she said, "Mom, you know what? The police handcuffed me to transport me." I was horrified. I broke down. Here's my child calling out for help. My child invited the police into her apartment to save her life. And they handcuffed her. And she said, "Mom, I didn't start crying until they handcuffed me, and I begged them not to, and they did it anyways." So the next few days were very emotional for my husband and I and our children. And I mentioned to a friend that how much this got to me. This incident of her having to be handcuffed, criminalized for asking for help. And my friend said, "Well, Beth, it's just protocol. It's just protocol." I mean, they don't know. They don't know if she's stark raving mad. They don't know that who she is at her core. They don't know what she could do. They don't know if she has a weapon. And I hung up the phone disappointed in my friend. And I said to my husband, "That's my child, and she was handcuffed for asking for help." And that's the difference here. That's for me is the issue. When we saw that video, and I wish to God that it did not have to come down to people using cell phones to record other people dying. For me, as a white woman in the suburbs, to understand what it's like. And I wish it didn't. And, but that's what it's come down to. That's what made it subjective and personal. And that's the difference between statistics and
Real experience.
Humanity.
You didn't understand your friend's point of view at all? That just went right out the window?
No, I did understand. And you know what I said to myself?
It's still painful. It would still be painful to me. Yes, I agree.
Yes. And what I said to myself was, I understand that she doesn't understand. I understand that she doesn't get it.
Okay, at the same time, my son's a cop, and I get it. I get what you're saying. I really do.
I do too.
I get what he's saying too. My son would say,
Yeah.
"Dad, I have no recourse. If I put somebody in there and they hurt themselves, if they hurt me, or if whatever happens, I'm liable for that." There
Yeah.
are people out there with cell phones. If they see him do something wrong to seemingly help someone, they can turn that situation around in a heartbeat. And now he's responsible for somebody's death, being hurt, whatever the situation is.
Yes.
It's a no-win situation. It really is. My heart goes out to you.
But doesn't it come down to humanity in that very moment? That's where I think we all can make a difference, is in that moment. Who do I choose to be? In that moment, who do those police officers choose to be?
Trust me, I'm not defending George Floyd's killer at all. That was
I'm not saying that.
There are situations that look terrible on film until you get the whole story, till you understand that they have to do that for certain reasons. Is it right? Is it wrong? I don't know. I mean, these have been debates longer than I've been in the looking at this stuff. These have been debated. These have been gone through Congress, through all sorts of channels, trying to get answers to these things.
But I guess to piggyback on Beth's story, and thank you for sharing that, is that
Yeah.
we have a situation where a lot of people are unhappy. Black people, let's talk about right now race.
Yes.
We can either look at something like the 13th. And again, my reason for the 13th is not that I'm saying that it is the be all and end all, but I found it a very convincing way, a history lesson of things I didn't know, just things I didn't know. We can either say to the Black person, the ones who are saying there's a problem, I hear you. I hear you. I've read studies, I've seen statistics, I've talked to this author, I've talked to this author, I'm aware of this theory, I'm aware of opposing theories, but I'm gonna choose to hear what you're saying, even though I have sources and facts and things that could easily negate what you're saying, because we're never gonna know. And I guess what I'm challenging you, Mike, is that you can stand there and say, I see this point of view, and I see this point of view, and this is an argument, and this is an argument, and this has statistics, and this scholar, Black scholar says this, and this Black scholar says this, and these white Southerners say this, all of which are saying that the problem is not that big, that problematic, it's in their heads. All those perspectives are to minimize the problem, to say it's not as big, it's a matter of perspective. Who you choose to believe is up to you. I can't say that this is the one. And when you say someone just tell me which one, that's never going to be true. That's not how life works. There's always interpretation in history. The question is, does the visceral pain of the moments make you think, now, there's something wrong here,
Yes.
something that's not quite been fixed? Or this is a continuation of a theory, a point of view, a school of thought that leads to, when you said it, everyone gets a prize, everyone like that's where I find it tricky when you talk to people in the majority, because they absolutely can say, I'm picking these 7 sources that agree with me, that don't say it's a big problem, because I don't necessarily want it to be a big problem. It doesn't impact my life. I don't have to. So who you choose to listen to is entirely up to you. But at some point, you're going to have to make a choice. No one's going to be able to say this is the truth. No documentary is going to say this is 100% the truth. But I've got a guy here, which is what I'm doing this for, who says, no, the 13th is pretty accurate. The 13th is pretty accurate based on family, things I've seen in Baltimore, things people have been arrested, things in Minneapolis, things in Ferguson, things in LA. It's not everywhere. It's not every police officer. It's certainly not your son. But when it's bad, it's rampant. And the people who should be protecting you are using it to enslave and exterminate you. And that's where I'm like, it's a choice what you want to listen to and then what you want to do from there. You can say, I need more proof, I need more arguments, I need more stats, I need more that. You can do that because it's not affecting your life on a daily basis. You have that prerogative because it's not gnawing away at you every day. Thoughts, sir? Mike?
Well, like I said, these have been gone back and forth for how long, and still we got nothing happening. How do we jumpstart that happen? So we want something to happen. There isn't a human being in this country that doesn't want something fixed. We don't know how to fix it.
I would disagree with you. I would say there's a huge part of America that says it never is a problem, and it still isn't. You are part of a group that says, I want it fixed, I really want it fixed. But ask anyone else, there's a huge portion of America. Candace Owens' video has 100 million views. That's a lot of views. Because it gives anyone who doesn't want to think it's a real problem, a black-skinned person saying it's not a problem. I'm going to believe her. She just said it's not a problem, and she happens to be black. Does she represent every black person's experience? Of course not. She's not even a black man.
I have no voice. I feel like we have no voice because we don't know. Should we have a voice? I'm not saying that in a derogatory way either. I'm saying it is for real. Should we have a voice in this? Because we don't know.
William?
Yeah, of course you have a voice. I mean, that's why I'm here. Like I'm listening to you. I want to hear your voice. I don't know your pushback in discussions about the things that you read on the other side. But here, I don't feel like you're rejecting everything that we're saying. I don't feel like you're rejecting everything the 13th, but I do feel like your reaction is to dig and find the things to disprove other stuff. And you're being
No,
fair
this is what I want to understand.
right. And you're being fair by saying that, you know, I have this side, I have this side, but I feel like if on this side, your answer to everything is, I know people that disagree with that on that side. And if you're on that side and you tell them, well, I know people disagree with you on that side, you're going to be confused in the middle. Instead of saying that I can prove both sides wrong, maybe it'd be better to just take in everything that you get from both sides, which is a lot. And then I think Riaz is saying, you know, based on that, anything new that you come across, you are more prepared to make an educated decision on how you want to approach it, you know?
Let's start wrapping this up. I guess the question would be, I'll start with you, Beth. When did you, if you can, at what moments do you feel like you shifted chairs? You saw something from a different perspective than you had seen before?
I had a huge shift when William mentioned the specific timing of the
Statues.
correction of the statues. I mean, that was a big moment for me.
Okay.
And Mike, I hear your intent to want to know more, and I sometimes share the same experience as far as hearing things over here, hearing things over here. That's what happens when you're in the middle, is you hear all kinds of things. Sometimes, I just want to say this, sometimes it gets so loud that I don't know what to think, so I have to go back to me. I have to go back to my heart. I have to go back to, what can I, Beth, do every single day to make things just a little bit better? And that might mean having a tough conversation with my husband. It might mean, for you, you know what I was thinking about? I was thinking about, Mike, if you, I'm sure with your family and your friends, you are in a great position to have people, when you start talking about some other perspectives that maybe you've heard from William, maybe they take just a slight shift. And that's where we can make a difference. Do you remember how you were the one who brought up the statistic as far as Oprah saying some white people are just going to have to die out? Those aren't the ones that you and I are going to be able to reach. But we can reach the ones that maybe because you are a police officer's dad, or because you're a white male, and because I'm a white woman living in the suburbs, in the South, you and I can have those tough conversations that maybe some other people aren't going to listen to William. And William, I'm sorry that they won't, but that's what, Mike, that's what you and I are meant to do. That's where we can change. Sometimes I need to stop listening so much to all the crap that's out there, because it's from one extreme to the other. And so hone in on, you have a sharp brain, you have a sharp mind, and I believe you have a good heart. And so go to that and see what you can do from your perspective. And William, I just want to tell you, I'm really touched that you would have all these conversations with us. I've watched some of Riaz's other 4-chair conversations, and I know you've done this before. And I appreciate the fact that you show up for us.
Yeah.
And thank you.
It's got to be hard to repeat yourself for 40 years. I mean, because it's unlikely that anything that will come up here hasn't come up 100 times before. So I appreciate you always being willing to, because it's a hard position to be in. It's a hard position to be in. I mean, it felt for me.
It's hard talking to a potential brick wall, but I know, that's the beauty of these situations is I know that's not going to be the case. So I love talking to people like you, Beth, and you, Mike, and other people that just have different opinions but want to have the conversation.
Mike, let me ask you, when did you shift chairs?
It's never ending. It happens all the time. I hear something from someone and I all of a sudden I get it. For instance, your truth. I poo-pooed that thinking, oh my God, what are these people trying to tell me now? Well, no, I get that now. So yeah, it's a constant evolution, and I hope everybody has that.
William, when did you shift chairs at all?
Well, with Beth, the first time I was trying to see things from both of your perspectives, obviously, throughout, but the time where I really put myself in a position of how you were thinking and what you were saying was talking about the city of Houston, and even, this 100-foot statue in Houston. That's not Mount Rushmore. Like that's one that's legitimately up for debate, right? So just thinking of it from that perspective, and Houston's not, a little podunk town either. Houston's pretty big. I haven't heard anything, out in the world that's something that is up for debate, but tomorrow's another day.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah, that one was kind of eye-opening.
Hope.
And then of course, you sharing your story about your kids,
Yeah,
and your daughter's relationship with the cops. As I'm sure you can imagine, I've been paying attention to as much as I can and trying to speak about as much as I can with all of these incidents that, at least have gone back to 2014 or so. And mixed in with what I found are a lot of incidents with mentally ill.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I too.
We, and by we, I'm speaking more in terms of liberals and Democrats, we are terrible at the catchphrases. Like, if there's one thing that we can learn from Trump, it's how to put together a better catchphrase, because one, I mean, you asked me earlier about, does that make you racist? No, but it is an example of white privilege. But white privilege is very easily turned into a synonym to being racist. And then that's, that has a negative connotation when it really shouldn't. The most recent one is defund the police.
Mm.
Nobody wants to defund the police. Like, there's nothing about defund the police. I mean, to Mike's credit, somebody wants to defund the police.
Yes.
that person's crazy, right? Like, the meaning of what they're saying is not to completely get rid of police. The main thing is to maybe shift money that's going to police into different areas, and don't force the police to be the end all be all of all the wrongs that are going on in this country. If there's one thing I'm behind, it's to hire people that are more trained to deal with calls for the mentally ill. I mean, there's no reason a police officer should have that job. So
We asked specifically, is there, a crisis response officer? Is there somebody who's trained? Because we've had to call the police numerous times to come help us. Is there somebody who can help, who's been trained specifically? So yeah, I thank you for saying that, William. I really appreciate you getting that, and all of you. I really do.
yeah, and I mean, this is kind of a transition to putting myself in Mike's shoes too, that adds to negative stigma around policing.
Yeah.
When most people, I don't know this for sure, Mike, you would have a better idea because your son is a cop. Most people, I don't think, get into policing to deal with mentally ill. I don't know what kind of training there is. I'm sure it's not universal around the country, you know, so we're putting these people in a very bad position, and then we're making them villains when they don't handle it properly. And that's not really fair.
Yes.
And for Mike, you know, I really, really did try to put myself in your position with everything that you're saying, because you're the perfect example of who I want to talk to, because you do care. Like, I know you're not throwing these things back at me because you're trying to silence the argument. And the reason you're probably getting a lot of backlash on Facebook, because that can be easily confused, because that's a very common tactic to shut down anyone that's trying to make change. But I know that's not your purpose. And I know you're coming from an area where you probably don't see anything. You probably, you know, there's no problem. So there's really no reason for you to care.
Mike, it must be so scary for you to have a son that's a police officer.
Right now, yeah.
I'm sure you're terrified for his safety and for his position, his job, his family. And that I can empathize with. And I pray for his safety and for those of his friends, just like I do for, you know, for William and experiences he's had with police officers and that I've had. You're coming from a different place, and your child's life is in danger now. And I get that.
Yeah. Mike, thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is the same thing. Like I said, it's all your perspective. Yes, I'm terrified for my son.
Yes.
Yes, there's a lot of people terrified for their sons too on the other side of the fence.
Mhm.
So what do you do here? And it to some it's justified, to some it's not. It depends on where you're at. So yeah, hopefully we can, the whole world can start having conversations like this, getting to know one another and understanding each other.
Thank you all very much. This was a long one. Thank you all for hanging in there. You know, we weren't going to solve racism today, but I do. Your parting gift is I will connect you all in a chat thread, and William knows from the previous one. They just keep going. They just keep going in a wonderful way. Like, take a look at this. I had a conversation with my father about this. I posted this. So I will connect you all. And thank you all for your trust. Thank you for your time. And really, really appreciate it. We can only do what we can do, and we're doing our best.